Welcome everyone to another episode of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Bonkers for the Super Nintendo, brought to us by Capcom. Bonkers was the last of the Super Nintendo made Disney games by Capcom. Only one other game was created after this, but it was only released in Japan, Magical Quest III. The game is very reminiscent of other Disney Capcom games with some fun, action platforming, good graphics, and a pretty decent soundtrack. Based, of course, on the Disney afternoon cartoon Bonkers, which has a pretty interesting history of its own. Originally made with the idea of actually being a Roger Rabbit cartoon, but after disputes started coming up about who actually owned the rights to Roger Rabbit, Bonkers was created. A former cartoon star turned police officer, in a real-world-like setting, with actual humans and animated characters, but unlike Roger Rabbit, even the humans in this world are animated. So here we go with Bonkers for the Super Nintendo. Has a pretty nice cartoon opening here with a spotlight and Bonkers running back and forth along the spotlight before going to the main menu. When you start up, you can either start a new game right away or check out the options menu, and the options menu really only contains a couple of settings, stereo or mono, and you can change the key configuration. Then when you're back at the menu and start up the game, we then get a brief story before going into the first level. After our opening storyline, where we see Bonkers' partner Lucky in an unfortunate car accident putting him out of commission and leave him bonkers in order to solve the case. Bonkers is tasked with finding 3 classic cartoon items, and to do so he must travel all around the Hollywood backlots, going to different various levels and taking out, of course, various bosses along the way. The basics for Bonkers is you have your dash attack, which allows you, of course, to run fast, run into enemies, and of course just get through the levels relatively quickly. However, you have a meter that must fill up in order to use the dash. You also have the bombs, which I just showcased there for the first time, throwing at one of Bonkers' friends, Fall Apart Rabbit, who you're going to find in every level of the game, and he usually gives you a 1-up, with the exception of one level where he'll give us a heart piece. Speaking of heart pieces, there's actually the ability to find a heart in many of the different levels of the game, giving you, of course, more total health. As you start the game, you only have 3 health, having to get cakes to replenish full health, or to find donuts to replenish 1 heart apiece. Up here on top of this fountain, by jumping on the water sprouts, you're able to get to the first of the extra hearts in the game. Each of the main levels of the game, and there's 5 of them, are broken up into 2 parts, with 1-1 being the first level and of course 1-2 being the second, and so on and so forth. At the end of the second area of each of the levels, you end up facing a boss. At the beginning of the second part of level 1, you can end up breaking the Donald Duck statue located at the beginning in order to find yourself one of these drinks. Drinking this will cause Bonkers, well, to charge up and start charging through all the enemies he sees around him. You'll find throughout the game tons of different question mark balloons, and when you find these question mark balloons, you'll have to do the dash attack into them in order to pop the balloon. So for the most part though, it's kind of annoying because you'll have to dash into one balloon, wait a few seconds for the dash to refill, and then you'll be able to run into another one of the balloons. Popping open these balloons will of course get you various different items, but mainly it's going to give you badges. Collecting badges in the game, collecting 10 actually, will give you another total bomb that you can use in your inventory. As you can see right now, I have 8 total bombs, though I started only with 5. Jumping up here, using the blimp on the left side, you're able to find the next heart piece. While the bombs aren't necessary for most normal enemies in the game, there are later bosses that you're going to have to use bombs on, so it's wise to collect a decent amount of them total. At the end of completing a level though, you get full replenishment for your bombs. So let's say we have now currently 8 available to us when we begin the next level, we'll have 8 in our inventory. Here we have the first boss of the game, the Thief. This ghost-like thief will possess one of 2 different items in the room, or reform himself in full as well. What you'll have to do is either charge into the coat rack, because jumping on it of course will have you land on one of the spikes at the top. You'll have to jump on the vacuum cleaner, and every time you get him out of one of the items, he'll then reform into his normal body, in which case you'll have to jump on top of him. When he's in his normal body, he will fire a projectile out once he forms into a solid mass, and then he'll back away from you. If you can time it correctly though, just wait for him to come on screen, then just follow him whatever way he ends up dashing and jumping immediately after he dashes, so that you'll be able to land on top of him as soon as he forms. After you've landed on top of him enough times though, you complete the level and move on to level number 2. Level number 2 takes place in the Hollywood Wacky Studios. Here you'll start off with a pretty interesting enemy, as you'll have these guys with shields on both the left and right sides blocking you from running into them, but of course they leave their head completely exposed. At the beginning of the level you'll have these balances, and you'll be able to step on one to raise the other. Do so standing on the right one to raise the left one so you can jump up to the lights in order to get the 3rd heart piece, giving us a total now of 6 hearts. Throughout the game, in this level in particular, and in a level later on, you'll have a lot of electrical equipment set up, and of course anytime you accidentally run into it, you'll be shocked. Another little cool effect here is you have different paints that are sitting on the ground, and when you step inside of them fully, Bonkers ends up getting painted that color. This part right here is pretty fun, as you have a moon-like setting with aliens on it, with giant fans below allowing you to have kind of an anti-gravity-like feel. Unfortunately though, bouncing up into the air, there's light spread around, as well as the giant UFOs firing lasers, so it's pretty easy to get hit along this area. After making it through the space portion, you make it to the Wild West setting. Now here you'll have some cactuses set up, so you'll have to watch out for them, and you have some pretty evil cowboy guys walking back and forth, of course firing guns at you. At the beginning of this area, you can climb up in order to find Fall Apart Rabbit. To do so, you'll have to jump up here and do a charge over to the left. Be sure to be careful and jump pretty much right away so you don't accidentally fall down the holes that end up getting created. Hit Fall Apart with a bomb, and then you can actually do a charge back over to the right to knock out this cowboy so you can get up here. Run along the top here, taking out the enemies, until you make it up to this part. What you'll have to do is do a charge over to the right and jump, and when you do so you'll land on top of the roof of the inn and go to a secret area, with some pretty cool cameos from Mickey and Donald. Also contained in this little hidden area happens to be the next heart piece that's able to be collected. Right past that area, you can do a charge over to the left here and duck down in order to do the roll, in order to find yourself replenishment for your bombs, as well as another 1-up. Right past the Wild West Studios, you'll have a couple of conveyor belts that are moving with some Wild West scenery in the background. Jump your way through this, watching out for banana peels and other things that get put on the track, and then get ready for the boss fight, which happens to be on a conveyor belt. Here, what you'll have to do is bounce on the head of the first guy on the conveyor belt and knock him off the edge by repeatedly jumping on him. Then you'll have to charge and hit the button on the right side in order to get the lights above to fall down, knocking the second guy down below. Of course, the whole time you're doing this, you'll have to watch out for banana peels as well as bombs that can knock you out and end up causing you to lose health. Once you knock the other guy down, bounce on his head just like you did the first guy, knock him off screen, and grab yourself the lamp from Aladdin. Level number 3 has us on the streets of Hollywood itself. Start off by bouncing on top of this doorway, watch out for this bee, and then do a running charge over to the left in order to grab yourself the next heart piece. One of the more annoying things to watch out for though in this level is the electrical signs that are on many of the different buildings in this area, which of course will cause you to end up getting shocked. And if you're standing on it when you get shocked, you can actually use that as a platform to get over to different areas if you like, but of course you keep running the risk of getting shocked over and over. Do a running charge over here underneath the staircase, take out the bag, and then grab yourself another one up. Like I mentioned earlier, Bonkers actually has a pretty interesting history. The fact is that Bonkers originally was also supposed to be Roger Rabbit, but like Roger Rabbit, who had a couple of cartoons based on him prior to the release of the film, they also wanted to give validity to the Bonkers character by having animated shorts with Bonkers before his cartoon ended up debuting. This ended up being Raw Toonage, which was a compilation show with multiple different parts, including also Marsupilami, which was an animated European comic which was bought up by Michael Eisner in the early 90s. And like Bonkers, also ended up getting its own full series as well. Even though the Bonkers cartoon series was originally actually supposed to debut before Raw Toonage, due to things Raw Toonage ended up airing first, giving more validity to the Bonkers character in the end. During the end of this stage, you end up getting to a highway segment where you can actually ride on top of the vehicles, or like I did for most of it, just try to outrun them by dashing along the screen. Either way, when you make it to the end of the area, you'll see Fall Apart Rabbit in the toll booth, and then move on to part 2 of level number 3. 3-2 has you in a long line of different vehicles that have been stopped, and you'll also be chased down by some wild cartoon scooters that are going to try to take you out. Thankfully, jumping on them easily gets rid of them, but it's kind of fun to just run ahead of them and see how far you can get before eventually they catch up with you. After another little segment, you'll be on a window washing platform moving upwards, watching out as enemies will appear from the windows, trying to throw plants at you. Along the way, you can replenish your bombs as well as grab a 1-up from one of the other random windowsills. Make sure though that you have a decent amount of bombs going into the next boss, as we'll need them in order to defeat him. Thankfully, they also give you a balloon right near the beginning of this rooftop segment, so you can replenish some of the health you may have lost during the course of the level. When you make it over to this solid roof, it's time for the boss fight, which is a giant toon helicopter who has a superhero-like friend along for the ride. Now for this fight, you have to really take out the copter, though the other guy will get in your way a little bit as well. And the way to deal with this guy is either by taking him out with bombs or by jumping on him. The helicopter itself though can only be taken out by actually throwing bombs at it. As you try to jump on it, you'll just run into the propellers. So the best thing to do is, if you don't have a ton of bombs, is to do a running charge ability onto the guy himself to knock him off screen, wait for the helicopter to appear, which you cannot attack until it actually goes straight. If you attack it while it's coming onto the screen, your bomb will end up just blowing up and won't do any damage to the copter itself. As the fight continues, he will get faster, of course getting it a little bit harder in order to actually hit the helicopter. Though usually when the fight begins, he'll immediately go downwards, so even when you throw the bomb, you'll still be able to hit part of the helicopter blade. Once you've delivered enough hits with him with the bombs, he ends up blowing up, and we move on to 4-1. 4-1 has us getting onto a giant cruise ship. And of course the level starts off with Bonkers just walking up casually up the stairs and onto the elevator before you're actually able to get control of him. At the beginning of the level, you're going to have brooms that are going back and forth sweeping up the deck here, and if you run into them, they end up sending you flying in a different direction. Near the beginning, you're also going to see boats, so when you jump on them, they end up swinging over to the right. What you'll have to do is jump on the boats in order to get up to this platform with Fall Apart Rabbit, and throw a bomb at them, like you usually do to get a 1-up, but this time, you're going to end up getting the piece of the heart. Our actual second to last piece of heart is we now only have one more to collect in the 5th world of the game. Throughout the deck of this ship, you also have to deal with rain, as well as barrels being thrown at you, which you can actually jump on and then propel yourself upwards to higher stuff, or just actually ride them along the level itself. Here, you're going to have to charge into this cactus in order to knock it off this platform, then do a running charge over it to get around it, or you can just take the hit by jumping on top of the cactus to finally get past. The birds in this area are pretty relentless, as they will be trying to drop different things on you, but thankfully you're near the end of the area when you get to that part. The second part of level number 4 has you inside of the ship itself. Bounce along the potted plants and you'll have to deal with the magical bags along the way as well. Thankfully destroying some of them, though, you may end up getting yourself another replenishment of your bombs. One of my favorite enemies in the entire game is these rats in the background of the pool tables that end up firing pool balls at you. While you only see them in this area of the game, they are definitely one of my favorites. Ride the elevator that you get to next in order to make it to the kitchen area. Down here, of course, you're going to have fire coming out of the stove itself. You'll have to wait for the fire to disappear in order to actually run across the stove. What would a kitchen area, though, on a ship be complete without having a nice fridge area as well? Here you're going to have penguins dashing back and forth, sliding on their bellies, as well as ice coming out of the pipes. Of course, if you end up getting hit by this, you end up getting frozen in place and end up losing health. Watch out for all the frozen fish that ends up falling from off the different hooks, and eventually, though, you will make it out of this area to the elevator and end up riding this all the way down to the basement area of the ship. Once you're down here, though, it's time to battle the boss, which ends up being Louse, a character who was in the actual Bonkers cartoon as well. For this guy, what you'll have to do is actually jump on top of his head. Relatively simple. He ends up actually shooting air out that will actually blow you back to the left side of the screen, so you have to be careful not to accidentally fall down the pit here. Anytime, though, he swipes at you, if you jump on his head while he's swiping, you may end up landing on his hand, which of course end up damaging you instead of doing damage to him. Every so often, while you're trying to jump on him, though, he will spit out a bone that you'll have to dodge, but overall this ends up being a pretty easy fight. Once you deliver enough hits to him, though, you end up completing the area and move on to the 5th level of the game. Level number 5 is a classic of platforming standards, and that is a sewer level. Start off by dropping down the hole below, and you'll actually have to do your dash ability many times throughout this area in order to get inside the pipes. To do so, you'll have to dash and then hit duck down in order to roll along the ground in order to enter the pipes. There's plenty of water in the area, which will end up causing you to get pulled in certain directions, so you'll have to be careful with the momentum of the water so you don't end up falling down in the pits. You'll have to use this also to your advantage to get over certain jumps in the area as well. In this area, though, you'll have to traverse some piping in order to get to the upper part, so you can continue on, watching out for some bugs that end up rolling on their back, and then end up causing spikes to come out, so you'll have to be careful if you try to jump on them. Over here, you'll have to hit this switch with a dash move, and then what ends up happening is the gate ends up going up. You'll have to do the same here, but it's a little bit trickier to do because you have a very limited amount of time in order to get up high enough in order to get through. And as you can see, unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough my first time around. Here we'll hit it again, and now actually climb up by just, instead of doing the water spout, instead just jump right up to the pipe, and you may be able to get inside quick enough. Here, do it again in order to hit this one, in order to go through this opening. In here, jump up to the top portion and ride throughout the pipe to drop down, or you can just go down the slimy hill itself. Here you'll have a relatively long area of the pipe to travel through before we make it to the end of 5-1 and move on to 5-2. 5-2 actually has us inside of a giant cave-like area, and you start off by running across the bridge. Usually I prefer the dash here to try to avoid as many of the fish, as well as get across before the bridge ends up breaking apart and causing me to fall down. There's plenty of enemies jumping out of the ground below, as well as bats and other things trying to hit you, so there's a good amount of stuff going on. Over here you're going to have to wait for the buckets to come up so you can actually jump on one of the moving buckets in order to get across the giant gap. Time your jumps correctly though so you can get across the second area to make it to a solid platform. When you make it over to these buckets moving up and down, ride the buckets upwards and then jump over to the right side, climb up the moving bucket so you can make it up to this platform to grab the final heart piece. We now have a total of 10 hits we can take before we end up losing a life. Of course, during this area you'll have to wait so you don't end up getting crushed by the platforms that are moving up and down, and then after you get past that you'll get ready for the boss fight. Here you end up battling the Collector. The Collector ends up actually being the first villain that Bonkers faced in the animated cartoon. What you're going to have to do for this guy is actually attack his machine with bombs, attacking behind the giant spike. After you hit him with a bomb, he ends up falling down, exposing the top portion of his machine that you can then jump on. You can actually jump on his machine multiple times sometimes before he ends up causing the electricity to come back and end up shocking you. Just be sure to dodge out of the way of his projectiles that he does fire out of the cannon down below, and then after you've done enough hits to him, he'll start charging across the screen. When it gets to this part, you'll just have to duck down, then hit him with a bomb once he charges past you, and then after you've delivered enough hits, you'll defeat him, and you'll move on to the final level of the game. The final level of the game has us traveling the Toon World. Here we'll have to deal with some evil clouds that are going to shoot lightning down at us, and then to get across most of the areas we can actually use these friendly little things to spring us really far throughout the level. The next segment you'll actually have to jump on these things as they move back and forth, sometimes hiding behind clouds, in order to get up. Watch out for a couple of candle enemies along this last part before we actually make it to the final boss of the game. The final boss ends up being a giant clock known as Pop's Time. Now this guy has had sick and tired of people not appreciating him, and he ends up deciding to attack you. This boss fight ends up being pretty cool, as he has two giant spike-like hands that he ends up blocking his face. Every so often he'll move one down so you can throw a bomb at him. After hitting him, springs and cogs will start flying out of him, so you'll have to watch out for those. What you'll have to do for the most part though is actually do a dash underneath of his legs so you can get to the opposite side of him, so you can then attack the other side of him. He'll alternate between the left and right sides, exposing himself. Sometimes if you're too quick, he'll end up just exposing the same side he did before, so you'll have to dash underneath of him to get to that opposite side. After you've delivered enough hits to them, you'll end up defeating them and you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Bonkers for the Super Nintendo. After the ending to the game, we then get our enemy roll call, seeing all the different villains that we fought throughout the game. Interestingly enough though, there's actually not a credit stream for the game. Bonkers for the Super Nintendo may not be the most popular or best overall game in the Disney Capcom relationship, however it's still a very fun action platformer to get through. Being the last of the classic platform style Disney Capcom games that were released in North America though, is a pretty good way to go out. Unfortunately, we never got Magical Quest 3 in North America until many years later when it was released for the Game Boy Advance. And the Bonkers cartoon itself, while it may not be as classically or finely remembered as Ducktales, Darkwing Duck, or Tailspin, is still a fun cartoon, and one that I can highly recommend going back and checking out. Though I have to admit, it would have probably been cooler to see Roger Rabbit in his own cartoon series. Bonkers ends up doing a pretty darn good job. After seeing Mickey and Donald, we then see Bonkers fall apart Rabbit and Toots, Bonkers' pet, together, before we have Bonkers pop out the end saying, "That's it for today." And with that, that will wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.